Basic ideas like supply and demand is why this thing has that price. That's a pretty uncontroversial mainstream idea most of us are not just familiar with, but that we implicitly believe.
Whoa, guys. If you have 1,000 people, you only have 5 gallons of water, 5 individual gallons of water to sell. The price for that is going to go way the fuck up. What am I doing? I don't need to explain this to you. You guys aren't stupid. Everybody understands that supply and demand is an observable thing. It's just an inescapable thing.
Prices change over the course of a product's lifetime, or randomly by the day, or by the computer and IP address.
Randomly by the day? Wait, what? What are we doing here?
Economists are constantly getting things wrong, but that's not what this video is about. Here in the US, we have a bit of a love-hate relationship with economists. We disagree with them on just about everything, but tune into any major news channel anytime anything happens, and there they are, telling us, well...
What are investors supposed to take away from this?
I'm not sure, John.
It's a bit of a meme to dunk on economists for getting things wrong, especially predictions. Not long ago, in 2022, 70% of economists polled by Bloomberg saw a recession coming in 2023 that just never came. GDP growth was in fact stronger than pretty much ever before. Same thing in 2021. 16 of the 36 living Nobel Prize-winning economists predicted mild, quote, transitory inflation, right before a 20-year high of nearly 8% that we're still not really done with. And that's...
I mean, we're kind of done with it. Kind of.
You know, actually, it's fine.
I mean, yeah, like, how do we define transitory inflation? Like, the Biden administration, they chose between inflation and high unemployment. Biden was serving as vice president when we did the stimulus program to help with the housing crash in the subsequent recession. And we saw unemployment spike up to, I want to say, close to like 11, 12%. What were the exact numbers? US unemployment. For the recession, it peaked actually closer to 10%. During the pandemic, it got briefly worse, and then we actually managed that pretty well. Got pretty bad, 14.8. But this was the highest unemployment rate that we had seen since the 80s under Reagan. And the administration, the Biden administration made a choice, and they chose to, make a bargain with a little bit of inflation to make sure that those unemployment numbers stayed low. And I think that was the right call. You kind of can't have both. Like in that spot, you can't really have like low unemployment, low inflation in the face of a rebounding economy coming off of a pandemic.
Because that's not their job. Telling us how the world works may be what they say their job is, how they're perceived, and what constantly asking them for their thoughts and predictions assumes, but really, the job of economists isn't to explain the world as it actually is. Really, their job is to represent the world the way they wish it was. And by doing that strategically, make that world a reality. Unfortunately for us, economists
I mean, are we going to even explain what he just said? We're just going to make that claim and just move on?
Aren't on our there, and what constantly asking them for their thoughts and predictions assumes, but really, the job of economists isn't to explain the world as it actually is. Really, their job is to represent the world the way they wish it was. And
then why did 70% of them predict a recession? How does that make sense? Do economists wish that the world was in a constant state of economic recessions, or?
By doing that strategically, make that world a reality. Unfortunately for us, economists aren't on our side.
I mean, this just seems like a... I've noticed with second thought, he'll say stuff, he'll make these big claims, and then oftentimes he just doesn't even bother to elaborate. I suspect maybe the rest of the video he's expanding on his introduction here, so we'll see how it goes, but
first, it's ad read time because I've got to pay my bills. Let me show you something real quick.
He got sponsors! He got his sponsors back! Guys, this is great news! He got the fucking sponsors back! Let's go! It's the funniest thing. It's not funny, but it is. It's the funniest thing, because after October 7th and after his deprogram podcast episode where he claimed that there were no such thing as innocent Israeli civilians, all of his sponsors dropped him. He lost all of his sponsors. And then he started framing. So when he lost all of his sponsors, he started plugging his Patreon. And the way that he started framing it right away was, we don't take any ad money. We're 100% viewer supported. Because he lost his sponsors. But he got him back. That's great news. Let's go. Get that bag.
Quick. Google your name. I know you have to open another tab or switch apps. Just do it real quick.
If I Google my name, it's going to take me hours to get through because I'm very famous.
You might remember in other videos, we've talked about the economy and growth and how they're not real.
What are we? The economy. These are just words. I mean, what is language? They're just words, just made up words.
They're relatively recent ideas built not on objective truths, but on specific political goals, bad logic, and subjective accounting decisions usually made by the rich and powerful for self-serving reasons, like more war for everyone and less war.
What does he have on the screen here? The US economy's rebound since COVID is kind of incredible. Why doesn't anyone seem to realize this? I mean, that's fair. We've dived into this topic so many times, but it's just a tough sell to Americans, or really like any populace. I mean, you'd have to have a really engaged populace for Bidenomics to be a persuasive political message. It's just the reality is it's just really tough to talk to someone who just got back from the grocery store and is paying, 20% more for groceries or 15% more for groceries than they were a couple years ago. It's a really tough sell to go to them and say, actually, we're the least bad in terms of economic recovery since COVID. We did the least bad. We're actually doing better than all the other G7 countries. Because when they hear that, for most Americans, they hear that, they're not going to be thinking to themselves, oh, America, yeah. They're thinking to themselves like, okay, great, but my groceries are 20% more and I'm paying more for gas and this sucks. And I got a raise, but most of that raise is going towards these increased prices. It's just a really tough sell. You really would have to change the entire country into one that is where everyone is just super engaged, and that's just probably never going to happen. So
work for them. We dunked on GDP not just because it's a bad metric, but because economic growth is fake, or more like.
I mean, I don't even know what to. If economic growth is fake, then why did like Lenin and Mao and Stalin try to grow their economies? Like why did communists try to do that?
Arbitrary. Except that because most governments care about.
When a country goes through economic growth, there's like kind of predictable things that happen. So like literacy rates go up, education levels go up, life expectancy goes up, general quality of life goes up, wages go up. Buying power goes up. We have these metrics that we can look to in order to gauge how people's lives improve in economically developed countries.
Keeping the rich happy, that fantasy has real consequences. Governments chase the fake idea with real policies that have an actual impact on your life. Usually negative. In this video, though, I want to go a step further in our economics bashing. It's not just that economists are often wrong. Everybody gets things wrong. Predictions, models, theories, whatever.
He's going beyond that. He's saying the economy itself is a hoax. It's just a fiction created by the fat cats. The 1% of the 1%.
It's not that they rely on faulty premises or bad data or subjective metrics that they usually can't defend very well. Every Econ 101 textbook should come with a million caveats that basically make the whole thing worthless. The idea that we're all self-optimizing, rational actors with perfectly ordered, fixed preferences chasing utility in a vacuum where we only communicate through prices that we can negotiate is a total fantasy. But that's not the point.
Who's making that claim? Like, who is actually making that claim?
All that isn't what I take issue with. Most economists themselves will readily admit to all these problems. The reason we shouldn't trust them is much more foundational to the discipline. Economists pretend that they and they alone, from a neutral outsider's perspective, understand capitalism.
The economy.
The economy. something they act as this complicated technical thing bound by secret rules for them to uncover with data, charts, and experiments.
I mean, this just sounds all very hyperbolic, doesn't it?
Reality is much sadder. Economists are in the business of producing, sanitizing, and bringing into the world tools of violence against the poor. When the rich want
What?
ways to get richer at the expense of the poor, which is the only way they can ever do that, the literal job of economists is to make the graphs, formulas, and policies that say, we have no other choice. Economists don't study the economy, they invent it. But
What the fuck are we? Is he gonna get into the substance here? Like, is he gonna explain these claims? Like, I feel like he keeps making these like wild claims and then just jumping on to the next claim.
how do they do that? First, there are the obvious ways, coming up with theories that serve the rich.
John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller.
In 1890, John D. Rockefeller spent about $600,000, 170
So, you know, economists, people that sort of study interconnected markets and these kinds of things, you know, they start making observations about what they view happening in the economy. They start identifying various corollaries and whatnot, and then they explain what they're talking about. And these kinds of things, like these kinds of interconnected markets, right, and the flow of capital, generally tends to favor people with enormous wealth. But he turns that into, like, the economists just viewed the economy, right, and then constructed all these metrics, made all these observations to intentionally make, like, Rockefeller super wealthy. Like, how much do economists get paid? They're making about $100,000 a year. The national average salary for economists is $100,000 a year. So for $100,000 a year, these guys are just inventing concepts in order to make Bezos and Musk super wealthy. Like, wouldn't you imagine that they would want a bigger piece of the pie? Like, if these people are only making $100K a year, like, what possible incentive do they have to just make things up in order to make Elon Musk wealthy? That seems kind of silly. Like, if that was the case, I would be asking for at least like $3 mil, $4 mil a year.
million in today's dollars to found the University of Chicago. Over the next 20 years, he would go on to put nearly $35 million more dollars into the school, or the equivalent of error, please use values of less than 10 million. Rockefeller once called this the best investment he ever made. That's because if you've ever heard of U Chicago, it's probably for its econ department.
He's alleging that John D. Rockefeller bribed the University of Chicago to create an entire curriculum in order to breed a bunch of economists that will just make him wealthier. Is that what he's saying here?
Famously, it hosted people like Milton Friedman, the founding father of monetarism, and Theodore Schultz and Gary Becker, the guys who came up with human capital theory. These guys
Hold on. If I look up, can we find like leftist economists that have come out of Chicago, or are they only breeding right-wing economists? Here are some examples of left-wing economists who graduated from the University of Chicago. Sebastian Edwards, a former student of University of Chicago. He has been involved in discussions about economic issues. Notable lists of economists. List of socialist economists can be found in Wikipedia, which includes various individuals who have contributed to left-wing economic thought. These examples highlight the presence of left-wing economists associated with the University of Chicago. I don't know anything about the University of Chicago, but from a cursory Google search, they're not just like pumping out right-wing economists. It looks like you can find some leftist economists that came out of that school.
guys are influential. You Chicago economists are always influential. They win more Nobel Economics Prizes than economists from any other school. They staff the Council of Economic Advisors to the president across both parties, and are at the front lines of creating economic theories you've heard about in the neoclassical tradition, what most of us get exposed to in high school or college as simply Econ 101. That's the first thing to focus on. At the very base level, economists create the frameworks through which we understand the world.
It has been a long time since I took Econ 101, which I did. But it's been about 24 years. What concepts do they teach in Econ 101? Because he seems to be making the case that like Econ 101 it's all just made up gobbledygook from the fat cats. I mean, supply and demand, obviously, right? But like they cover things like scarcity, opportunity cost, marginal thinking, supply and demand, and macroeconomics. Okay.
Basic ideas like supply and demand is why this thing has that price. That's a pretty uncontroversial mainstream idea most of us are not just familiar with, but that we implicitly believe.
Oh boy. Oh, guys. Whoa, guys. Supply and demand has just been the impact that supply has and demand has, and the way that their relationship to each other has had a measurable impact on the cost of goods and services for literally thousands of years. Marx did not deny that supply and demand were real forces that impacted prices. Like, Marx himself didn't run away from supply and demand. He wanted to add a different kind of value. Like, I think it was like, what did he call it? The general labor theory of value. And that was about like surplus value, you know, like you have to measure worker productivity in units of time, and then you assign a value based on that. And then whatever the capitalist sells the good for above that, you know, like unit of time measurement or whatever. We call that surplus labor. But Marx never said that supply and demand was like a fake hoax. How could it be? I mean, it's such a predictable phenomenon too. If you have 1,000 people, you only have 5 gallons of water, 5 individual gallons of water to sell. The price for that is going to go way the fuck up. What am I doing? I don't need to explain this to you. You guys aren't stupid. Everybody understands that supply and demand is an observable thing. It's just an inescapable thing.
Even though, when you really think about it, you can probably name 1,000 counterexamples. Prices change over the course of a product's lifetime, or randomly by the day, or by the computer and IP address.
Randomly by the day? Wait, what? What are we doing here? What is he talking about? Best Buy, they just, you know, they get the Geek Squad. When the Geek Squad has downtime, no one's coming in to fix their computers. They just send the Geek Squad out to wander around Best Buy, and then they just arbitrarily change prices. Did you see Hassan pulled up Willie Mac's docs on stream? I saw that he reacted to a BE video, which is just it's just stunning that he keeps doing that, by the way. When BE is just, he is one of the most deranged people online, straight up. Like, BE is one of the most deranged people online. I have no idea why he would keep putting his videos on his stream. It's crazy.
You're using to access it, or how well the guy who's selling it knows you, or examples. Prices change over the course of a product's lifetime, or randomly by the day, or by the computer and IP address you're using to access it, or how well the guy who's selling it knows you, or if you get a discount for buying more than one, or...
What? That's not random. Giving a discount is not a random thing. It doesn't, like, a discount itself, the existence of discounts doesn't discount the principle of supply and demand. If somebody gives you a good deal on a product because you're their friend, like, what does that have to do with supply and demand? How does that undermine the principle of supply and demand at all? What relevance is that? If you, there's a few different reasons why maybe giving a discount on an item, maybe even intentionally taking a loss, would be a good idea if you're trying to foster consumer loyalty. If you're trying to create a consumer that will come back and repeatedly give you business. That doesn't mean that the laws of supply and demand go right out the window because I can get a fucking discount on a second sweater if I buy one sweater.
If you're using a referral code, means TV link in the description. Then there's the fact that nobody treats a phone...
Wait, what? There's so many layers to this. I just can't get over this whole section. It's really blowing my mind.
Basic ideas like supply and demand is why this thing has that price. That's a pretty uncontroversial mainstream idea most of us are not just familiar with, but that we implicitly believe. Even though, when you really think about it, you can probably name 1,000 counterexamples. Prices change over the course of a product's lifetime.
That is not a counterexample to supply and demand. The elasticity of prices are a reflection of supply and demand. The fact that prices change over time, they go up and they go down, that's a product of supply and demand.
Or randomly by the day, or by the computer and IP address you're using to access it, or
The fact that there are different markets, like one good could cost more in a different market than another market. There's all kinds of reasons for why those price differences would exist, including supply and demand. But there's also other variables to consider, like if there's tariffs in place in that country or whatever.
Or how well the guy who's selling it knows you, or if you get a discount for buying more than one, or
None of these negate or are a counter argument. None of these examples disprove the principle of supply and demand.
or if you're using a referral code. Means TV link in the description. Then there's the fact that nobody treats a phone from one company as the same as a phone from another company, or even one model or color as the same as another.
What? Maybe I didn't get enough sleep last night. I don't know what point he's making here with this. Hold on, someone explain this to me.
Referral code. Means TV link in the description. Then there's the fact that nobody treats a phone from one company as the same as a phone from another company.
What? Hold on, someone explain that to me. We have to try to steelman this argument. Is he talking about having the same prices? Like the Galaxy Note is the same price as like an iPhone or something like that? I straight up don't understand this point. We'll let him finish the point and maybe it will make more sense. Okay.
Or even one model or color as the same as another. The very idea of there being a supply of phones and a demand for phones is an abstraction. It doesn't really exist because every phone is its own product, and its price is just one of its qualities we take into consideration. It's not just tacked on at the end either. It's built and iterated throughout the process the same way the camera is. It's based on a bunch of other prices. And while sure, you might buy a phone for $1,000, you can't then turn around and sell it back to Apple at that same price. Why not? If price was a perfect mirror of value that emerges from the meeting point of supply and demand, what does it matter to Apple to have one rectangle worth $1,000 or several paper rectangles worth $1,000? Things fall
because the earning potential is because of the product. The promise of the iPhone for Apple is that they can turn around and sell that iPhone for profit. You can't, what is he proposing that Apple, like, it shouldn't be any different if they had like $700 bills. Can they turn around and sell those $700 bills for a profit? What? It's about earning potential. It's about the profit motive. It's about earning potential.
Apart even more when you go looking into how
I'm sorry, maybe I'm too stupid. I mean, this whole point is really
nobody treats a phone from one company as the same as a phone from another company, or even one model or color as the same as another. The very idea of there being a supply of phones and a demand for phones is an abstraction. It doesn't really exist because every phone is its own product, and its
the abstract concept of supply and demand doesn't exist because each phone is its own product. He is correct in the sense that the value of a phone is not based on based on perceived value and not purely on production cost. Well, yeah, but I don't understand I don't understand how this conflicts with the principle of supply and demand. Obviously, the manufacturers, they need to take a look at pricing ranges to determine their potential profits for that item. And so you're going to be stuck in a particular range, or maybe you might deliberately take a loss on an item to create to corner a certain market. And we see this happen all the time with like online platforms like fucking Hulu and Amazon and, you know, Netflix and Spotify only. Did you guys know that Spotify only made a profit for the first time in 2024?
Hutch watching a second thought video.
I just feel dumb. Like, you know, I feel dumb because I just don't get the points that he's making. They just don't make sense to me. Spotify has been a company for how long? When was Spotify made? It was 2006. There's actually a really good Netflix show on Spotify, on the creation of Spotify. Anyways, Spotify only made a profit for the first time in 2024. That took 18 years to make a profit. Yeah, anyways.
Price is just one of its qualities we take into consideration. It's not just tacked on at the end either. It's built and iterated throughout the process the same way the camera is. It's based on a bunch of other prices. And while sure, you might buy a phone for $1,000, you can't then turn around and sell it back to Apple at that same price. Why not? If price was a perfect mirror of value that emerges from the meeting point of supply and demand, what does it matter to Apple to have one rectangle worth $1,000 or several paper rectangles worth $1,000? Things
Like that point right there, I don't understand. I want to steel man the argument, and I feel like I'm too stupid to steel man it because I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand that point. The potential value for a unit, like a good, like an iPhone, the potential value for a company like Apple, or even in like individual merchants, I guess, whatever. The point is that the earning potential for that thing is determined by the demand for that item. And so, you would want to have something like an iPhone that you can turn for a profit. But like, if I handed you $700, like, I just don't understand the point at all. So it's about close to half of Americans own an iPhone. So if you can create if you can create an item, and then if you can create so much demand for that item that people feel like they have to have this item, and then half of an entire country owns your item, that's where you can make fucking hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars. I don't know. What is Apple worth at this point? Isn't it trillions? You can't make that kind of profit. Or can you? No, you can't make that kind of profit just like taking cash and then like investing it or whatever.
Fall apart even more when you go looking into how companies actually price things. Sometimes a train ticket will be set at a flat rate you pay to get on. Sometimes it's based on the distance you travel. Sometimes you buy the specific seat with specific perks like last-minute cancellation. Most of the time, things are priced with formulas that are themselves based on either data, vibes, or just good enough conventions like, here's what a normal markup is, just add 30% to what you paid for it and you'll be fine. Interestingly, it's often the case that formulas are based on economists' work more directly.
What is the average profit margin across all industries? Do we even have a metric for this? The average gross profit margin across all industries is approximately 36.56%, while the average net profit margin is around 8.54%. Is net profit margin what your profits are after all of your like liabilities? Yeah, does that include after taxes as well? I would assume not, right? Net profit margin from revenue, while net profit margin accounts for all expenses, including operating expenses and taxes. So the average net profit margin is around 8.54%. Okay.
Like, for example, when accountants at pharmaceutical companies have to help their managers decide whether to invest in developing one drug or another. They'll use what are called discounting functions. Basically, a form
discounting functions. Oh no. We're making up words now, guys. It's just a funny play on words. I'm a child. What do you want me to do? Discounting functions. All right, let's go.
Formula that lets them put a present price on future drugs. Discounting functions are based heavily on the economic theories fleshed out by the economist Irving Fisher. His formulas were first mainly academic, then went into financial accounting textbooks, and then turned into common practice. People use these formulas not because the theory behind them shows us the truth of the economy. Fisher's theories were just that, theories about where value comes from, which his answer was future profits. But discounting functions have helped to build a world in which, some of the time, Fisher's theory does apply. Future profits do determine price in some cases, not because Fisher was brilliant, but because he was useful for shareholders. The world was retrofitted onto his theories, built around accommodating.
Somebody give me the TLDR. Okay, all right, fine. Boxdropper, you've convinced me. Explain discount functions to me like I'm 5. Imagine you're getting candy. Let's say you can get 1 candy now or 2 candies tomorrow. A discount function is just a way of saying how much you care about the future. It helps you decide, is 1 candy now better than 2 candies later? Or how much is candy tomorrow worth compared to candy today? Okay. Why do they use all these big complicated words? This seems not like a crazy concept. A discount function is a math tool that shows how people value things in the future compared to right now. Simple example. So today, 1 candy feels like 1. Tomorrow, it feels like 0.9. Next week, it feels like 0.5. That feeling is the discount. The further away something is, the less exciting or less valuable it feels to your brain. People use discount functions to decide save money now or spend it, eat the cookie now or wait to have to later, help the planet today or later. Even grown-ups don't always make smart choices because the now always feels extra strong. Okay, I understand. Let me know if you want a version with graphs or how economists use it. Nope. You got me with that explanation. I don't need to go any further.
The fact that discounting functions could and would be used because those who had power adopted and deployed them. Discounting functions, as investment technology that managers use, implicitly put the interest of shareholders first when making decisions about things like developing drugs. Fisher's idea of value is just a theory. It's a political opinion, really, but it's also a tool that an economist.
Is it a theory that things will have different value in the future than they have today? Like, why would that just be a theory? Doesn't that just feel self-evidently true?
Economists built that served the rich. So now, the drugs we produce in a capitalist society are indeed based on future profits. A similar thing can be said for supply and demand. Listen, like the profit motive is one of the reasons why American companies develop like oftentimes the best treatments that you can find in the world. I feel like a based mixed economy person would be like, we should take all we can get from that dynamic, you know, a pharmaceutical company being motivated by profits, and then use it in a way that can benefit people. So like the perfect example of this is Operation Warp Speed. We spoke about this recently. There's a whole section in Abundance all about Operation Warp Speed. And I didn't know the particulars of Operation Warp Speed. It was kind of fascinating. So we're in November 2019. Some people are getting sick in China. People are starting to get a little bit nervous. And then we fast forward to March of 2020. And boy, oh boy, we are in a global pandemic. And we need to get out of this thing as quickly as possible. Otherwise, the global economy is going to completely collapse. When did Operation Warp Speed, when did they announce that? Hold on. When was the first news report of Operation Warp Speed? Was on April 29th, 2020, and the program was officially announced on May 15th. I think they started Operation Warp Speed. I think they officially started it much sooner than that. Okay, so we're in this pandemic now, and the Trump administration has to decide what they're going to do. And so what they do is they come up with this plan where they go to the major pharmaceutical companies and they incentivize them heavily with the profit motive by telling them, if you guys can create a safe and effective vaccine, we will purchase all of your inventory. And so now the pharmaceutical companies, they don't need to worry about like potential returns. It's just guaranteed returns. So now they're incentivized to bring on the most talented people, to hire the most talented people who can come up with a vaccine as quickly as possible. And there were three different vaccines that they were looking into creating. One was mRNA, and then the other two I don't remember. And through mRNA technology that has been advancing over the last like couple of decades, they were able to develop a vaccine. These major pharmaceutical companies, all of them were able to develop vaccines within a month. It was like 3 weeks later. It was like 25 days or something like that for Pfizer at least, or Moderna, one of the two. And then of course they fast track the human trials, tested on humans for tens of thousands between all these pharmaceutical companies. They test for like 10 months, and holy shit, these are really great results. Let's get it out there. And now the government just bought all of that inventory from Pfizer. And so, and then they turned around and they gave it to Americans for free. I mean, you might call that like a form of socialism. We just turned around and we just gave it to people for free. But the profit motive was an essential part of like why these vaccines got done so quickly. Like these companies were motivated like holy shit, this is like free money. We need to get on this as quickly as possible. So do I really care if like the board of a pharmaceutical company made a lot of money during that exchange? Not really. Am I supposed to think that this is like pure evil? I don't know. There's plenty to pick apart when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. I'm not saying the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have problems. They obviously have problems, like with the opioid epidemic that they unleashed on Americans. That was a big fucking problem. But we're just talking about the profit motive. We're just talking about how that was a beneficial thing in that context because it led to vaccines that helped us sort of quote unquote go back to normal. Warp Speed
was unique to the situation of COVID, though. But there are other applications. I mean, government has done similar things in the past. The government has stepped in and heavily subsidized certain industries in ways that benefited Americans. But that's just kind of the more recent, more extreme example of this. You can say that the profit motive is an inherently evil thing, I guess, if you want to make that argument. Okay, but in this case, in Operation Warp Speed, it led to a really good outcome. Like, we were able to distribute 200 million vaccinations. We were able to conduct like 200 million vaccinations in less than 90 days, and that saved estimated tens of millions of lives. And without the profit motive, I mean, I'm sure they would have got it done at some point without the profit motive, but maybe it would have taken 2 months or 3 months or 6 months to develop the vaccines instead. And we were on a ticking clock. Like, every day that went on where Americans were having to do these mitigation stuff where, 6 foot distance, so you can only eat outside, and every day that went on was harmful, was doing harm. They had profit motive to unleash the opioid crisis. I mean, that's an example of when the profit motive leads to an evil outcome. So I'm not here to tell you that the profit motive is universally good, but what I am saying is that it's not universally bad. Like, we've benefited obviously in profound ways because of iterations and innovations in technology and medical science because of the profit motive.
The idea isn't a universal truth, we know that, but it does color how we think about the world. And it means that some companies can jack up prices and blame it on scarcity.
Okay, hold on, I'm sorry. Hold on.
The idea isn't a universal truth, we know that, but it does color how we think about the world. And it means that some companies can jack up prices and blame it on scarcity. We just don't think about that much. Economic theory glosses over this agency. It glosses over the
I mean, we saw some examples of like shrinkflation, and we saw I think that we observed for different companies that they were posting like record profit margins while Americans were struggling to make ends meet. I don't know how widespread that was, but I certainly saw individual instances of specific companies that were like, how widespread was that is my question. Well, anyways, yeah. I mean, certainly you can find instances of price gouging, which is one of the things that Kamala ran on. Yeah.
1,000 little decisions, moments, conventions, laws, individual people you need to have to actually make something, make the place to sell it, make the money to buy it with, and have the transaction happen. Economists assume money, markets, prices, transactions all spontaneously appear out of thin air, and that all that history.
Do they? Is that what economists are saying?
And have the transaction happen. Economists assume money, markets, prices, transactions all spontaneously appear out of thin air, and
I don't think that's what economists say. I could be wrong. Who the fuck says that?
That all that history just evaporates the moment you and I decide to exchange something. And they've built theories and tools around this that come to have profound impacts on our lives. But that doesn't just happen. For economics to be performative, economists have to actually get involved in performing them. And that usually means doing experiments. You might have heard of this already, but UChicago is famously known for producing the
To be clear, like the centrally planned economies that we've observed throughout history, they were doing experiments, oftentimes with disastrous results. On the more extreme end, the results were like 50 million dead because of famine in China. And in the case of the Holodomor, it was the 5 to 7 million dead. Because of that. I mean, like the idea that economists do experiments, he's sort of presenting that as though it's this inherently like evil thing.
Chicago Boys, a group of Chilean economists who were some of the first to do neoliberal economic theory in practice when they directly advised the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet.
I read about this in an audiobook. I read about this. There's a book called... I read about these guys. There was some fucked up shit. These Chicago Boys, there was some shady shit there. It's a book called Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present by Ruth Ben Ghiat. Isn't Ghiat like a big ass? It's Ghiat. I read about these Chicago boys. This was some fucked up shit. He's about to touch on some fucked up shit that happened.
To do that, the Chicago boys created El Ladrillo, the brick, a 200-page economic program for Chile after Pinochet took over in a CIA-backed military coup. Among their
Yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. What we did in Chile was not great.
recommendations: trade liberalization and tariff reductions, widespread privatization, including of Social Security, and a regressive value-added tax. Together, Pinochet's dictatorial
We had a whole plan. Like these guys had a whole plan. And was it Nixon who backed the coup in Chile? I think it was Nixon. And then did they coup Allende? Is that who it was? Allende, right? Who was like a big old socialist guy, right? It was Nixon, yeah. It was 1973. Nixon had these guys just waiting in the wings. It was pretty nefarious. Nixon had these guys just waiting in the wings with like a whole economic plan that they were gonna pursue after they couped Allende and replaced him with Pinochet, who was this like horrible tyrant.
rule and the Chicago boys' shock therapy meant thousands of political opponents were tortured and disappeared, tens of thousands of protesters were arrested.
Wait, was that because of the wait, hold on. Was that because of the Economists? Hold on.
Pinochet's trade liberalization and tariff reductions, widespread privatization, including of Social Security, and a regressive value-added tax. Together, Pinochet's dictatorial rule and the Chicago boys' shock therapy meant thousands of political opponents were tortured and disappeared, tens of thousands of protesters were arrested.
Wait, hold on. The Chicago boys, those economists, they were not, didn't advocate for this to happen as far as I'm aware. Pinochet did that because he was a fucking tyrant. He was an authoritarian.
And a devastating economic crash for Chile in 1982 that left 1 in 4 people unemployed. GDP eventually rebounded and boomed.
We would have to look into, I mean, there was a global economic crunch around like the late 70s and the early 80s. Was it these policies in particular that led to that economic collapse? I'm not qualified. I wish I knew that answer so I could just tell you. Coffees for sandwich with 18 months. Thank you so much. Moldy Yapper with 28 months. I think I already got you.
But even when it did, the Pinochet regime ended with 45% of people in poverty, education and healthcare heavily privatized, and the richest 10%'s income going up 83%. When Pinochet stepped down, Chile was the 8th most unequal country in the world. Milton Friedman called this a miracle. And Chile is far from the only place where these little
Milton Friedman called what a miracle? He's making so many claims here. Milton Friedman called
little experiments take place. Economists like Jeffrey Sachs have given other countries like Bolivia, Poland, and Russia the shock treatment too. That didn't work out either. More recently, economists
the miracle of Chile was a term used by economist Milton Friedman to describe the reorientation of the Chilean economy in the 1980s and the effects of the economic policies applied by a large group of Chilean economists who collectively came to be known as the Chicago Boys, having studied at the University of Chicago where Friedman taught. He said that Chilean economy did very well, but more importantly, in the end, the central government, the military junta, was replaced by a democratic society. So the really important thing about Chilean business is that free markets did their way in bringing about a free society. The junta to which Friedman refers was a military government that came to power in 1973 coup d'etat, which came to an end in 1990 after a democratic 1988 plebiscite removed Augusto Pinochet from the presidency. We're showing the rate of growth GDP. It's showing that Chile had better success in terms of growth of GDP throughout the 80s and 90s. What about poverty rates? What I want to say, poverty rates in Chile by year. I want to go back fucking decades. How do we look this up? What happened to the poverty? Obviously, Pinochet was a horrible tyrant. So let's just be clear about that. But we're separating the economics from this despotic regime, this despotic murderous regime.
Experiments have taken on a more conservative scale and approach, but it's been no less devastating. A lot of the time, these experiments are directly sponsored by philanthrocapitalists who want to test run their libertarian fantasies, and only their libertarian fantasies. No billionaire is sponsoring research on socialist economics in practice, mind you. Economists, by and large, are of the same pro-capitalist breed. Left-wing, anti-capitalist work in political economy does exist, quite a lot of it actually, and it's remarkably thorough, but it's just not getting this kind of support and attention, whether that's in the media or when it comes.
Because at this point, there's just broad consensus with economists and academics that the types of policies that he would advocate for would probably be bad overall.
It's time to do the government work. In any case, in other instances, these pro-capitalist neoclassical economists work more directly with governments. In Egypt and Peru, another economist, Hernando de Soto, got to flex his theory.
Ooh, listen to those. Listen to him roll his R's. Hernando de Soto.
These pro-capitalist neoclassical economists work more directly with governments. In Egypt and Peru, another economist, Hernando de Soto,
Ooh, damn. Okay. Listen to his Spanish accent. Let's go.
got to flex his theories about the economy. His secret mystery behind why capitalism worked in the West but not elsewhere was, according to him, as simple as having formal property titling, basically a legal record of who owns what land and housing. De Soto argued that if the poor were poor in the global South, it was because they had all this wealth sitting idle in homes and land that they couldn't use to take out loans. Therefore, they couldn't become entrepreneurs by starting businesses, and that's why they're poor. De Soto didn't blame the poor for being lazy or having backwards cultures like other economists. He had a simple market solution, and because he was influential, with the backing of several prominent neoliberal thinkers and organizations, in 2004, the World Bank took a chance on his ideas and ran the Urban Property Rights Project.
If you change your mind, take a chance, take a line, take a chance, take a chance.
In Peru. Did it work?
Honey, I'm still free.
Quote,
Take a
"Property
chance
titling
on
had
me."
produced no increase in credit to the poor. How about in Egypt? There too, De Soto ran his experiment. What was that result? Quote, the evidence available shows that there is little or no positive impact. The impacts we did see were property owners getting more rights and tenants getting screwed over a lot more.
I mean, we can just observe the impact that developing, like economies that develop faster because they liberalize their markets have had tremendously positive results. I mean, the most extreme examples of this are going to be in India and China. They were able to drastically reduce. I mean, it's not that there's no poverty in these countries anymore, but if you compare it to like 100 years ago, they were able to drastically reduce the amount of people in those countries that live in extreme poverty.
Rents were
I'm quite frankly not I would want to get Econoboy in here to talk about the shit, so I'm not going to bullshit you about shit that I don't know.
jacked up under the new titling system that made selling plots easier for owners, especially big owners, which makes sense. If the only asset you own is the house you live in, property title or not, you're not gonna sell it unless it's the very last thing you do. With all this land being made into liquid assets,
That doesn't seem true.
if the only asset you own is the house you live in, property title or not, you're not gonna sell it unless it's the very last thing you do.
I mean, I feel like
With
that's...
all this land being made
You could sell it just to make a profit, right? Like,
into liquid assets,
sell it, make a profit, buy a different house and whatever.
the wealthy could
Doesn't have to be like the last thing you do. I don't understand that.
speculate with it, buying up more of it pretty easily during economic downturns that force the poor to sell them off, and concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And if the wealthy didn't get there first, tons of small owners, and I do mean exclusively small owners, lost their land when they couldn't pay what loans they did take out, and the bank took their collateral. From the economist point of view, though, this all just looks like growth, because suddenly so much more wealth was visible. The whole thing was a total flop. People just weren't taking out loans now that they had property titles. And that makes sense because De Soto's theory was based on bullshit. In countries like the US, where he was supposedly taking inspiration from, most small businesses don't need to borrow at all. When they do, the most common source of loans is credit cards. Using your house as collateral isn't even an option for most people. Obviously, property titling wasn't what made capitalism work in the West.
Wait, is that true? Is this not a common thing for like small business loans to use their house as collateral?
In countries like the US, where he was supposedly taking inspiration from, most small businesses don't need to borrow at all.
What? Hold on. Is that true? He's making so many claims here. Do most small businesses require loans? Most small businesses do require loans, but the specifics can vary widely. It depends on your credit score, your annual revenue, years in business, debt to income ratio, industry and business plan. Is he just making stuff up? And he's saying for most people, they can't use their homes as collateral for business loans. Is that true? Most people can use their homes as collateral for a business loan, but it's not a universal solution. The ability to use a home as collateral depends on various factors, including the lender's policies, the borrower's financial situation, the nature of the business. Here are some key points to consider. There's lender policy, equity to loan value, business type, personal financial situation. I guess that doesn't really answer the question, but you know, Google seems to think that most people can use their homes as collateral for a business loan.
When they do, the most common source of loans is credit cards. Using your house as collateral isn't even an option for most people.
He's saying the most common form of debt for small businesses is credit cards? Could that be true? Credit cards are a significant source of financing for small business owners, often used for day-to-day expenses and cash flow management. In fact, 58% of businesses opted for credit cards in 2024, highlighting their preference for quick access to funds compared to loans. But this is different than when you're first starting a business. Is he just kind of conflating the two things here?
And that makes sense because DeSoto's theory was based on bullshit. In countries like the US, where he was supposedly taking inspiration from, most small businesses don't need to borrow at all. When they do, the most common source of loans is credit cards. Using your house as collateral isn't even an option for most.
So he's right about the credit thing. I don't know where he's getting most people can't use their house as collateral. I don't know where he's getting that info.
People.
Does he cite his sources in here? Citations and further reading. Okay, hold on. Chicago and Chile, Rockefeller, Economist predictions. He doesn't have any sources for this credit card, small business stuff he's doing here.
Obviously, property titling wasn't what made capitalism work in the West. Imperialism was.
Well, I mean, imperialism certainly helped certain capitalistic economies thrive, like the United States, but it's not necessarily the thing that made it work. I think there's a difference between these two things.
But that doesn't make for good economic experiments from the World Bank's perspective. But we've gotten off track. The worst part of this isn't that DeSoto got it wrong or based his theory on nothing but vibes.
Okay, hold on. Now I got to do a cursory. Was DeSoto correct in his analysis about property titling? Okay, again, I'm just telling you what Google says. Hernando de Soto's analysis about property titling is complex and has both positive and negative implications, positive aspects. De Soto argues that secure property rights lead to increased access to credit markets and capital formation, which can benefit the poor and integrate them into the formal economy. Negative aspects. However, his methods may inadvertently increase vulnerabilities and exclusion among marginalized groups, suggesting that titling could exacerbate existing inequalities. Mixed evidence. While some studies support the idea that property titles can facilitate access to credit, others indicate a lack of a clear relationship between property titles and credit access. Overall, De Soto's insights are significant, but the relationship between property titling and economic outcomes is nuanced and requires careful consideration of the context and implications.
Economists do that all the time. That's not what this video is about, remember? It's that his theory actively reshaped politics in several countries because the rich and powerful could benefit. Before De Soto, poor people had power when they could keep the rich at bay by holding land and housing in common or with informal titles that made it hard to buy up. They had power when their wealth wasn't too liquid and tied up in small assets like livestock. But this one economist's theory and his little experiments and the mountains of support from the world's richest and most powerful people actively destroyed that power. Titling programs meant foreclosures and evictions targeting the poor. It meant more people having to find work outside the home for large capitalists who now owned more. It meant courts, bailiffs, prisons, and armed police being hired to enforce these new property laws. Violence for the many and prosperity for a select few.
Property titling. Property titling policies have been associated with increased wealth for poor people in several ways. Formal property rights help the poor transform their wealth into capital, which is crucial for economic development. Urban land titling has been linked to a 9 to 10 percentage point increase in loan approval rates for housing construction, indicating improved access to credit. Land titling can enhance physical and human capital investment, which is essential for reducing poverty in future generations. Proper titling allows the poor to collateralize their land, enabling them to access credit for productive projects, thereby increasing their income. Overall, property titling can significantly improve credit access and financial opportunities for the urban poor. These factors collectively suggest that property titling policies can indeed lead to increased wealth for poor. This is where I need like a proper economist on speed dial.
Everywhere the story is the same. Capitalist growth just means inequality. Economists are not your friends.
Well, I mean, economic growth leads to prosperity, right? I mean, obviously for super wealthy capital owners, but for people themselves.
And they do not deserve your trust. They are foot soldiers doing the dirty work of justifying misery.
This is what I mean when I said, like, this is why I think black pill left, I think, is a good descriptor for these types of people. It's because, so we've identified certain characteristics of what I call black pill lefties. We've identified certain narratives that they commit to and spread. We've already unpacked a lot of those, like Green Lantern theory and a belief that the two parties are fundamentally more or less the same. If they do flowchart stuff, you know, but underneath all that, like underneath the behavior is the black pill. Underneath that is the belief that the world is not getting better, it's getting worse. And if underneath all the behaviors, they believe that America is the worst and most evil country that has ever existed. Or they believe that the material conditions for people all over the world is getting worse with time. When all the data that we have right now demonstrates the opposite to be the case. There's way more economic development, way more prosperity across the world. By so many metrics, we live in a better society and world now than we did 100 years ago. It's true that 100 years ago, you had an easier time buying a home, for example. I think when we looked it up last week, as a percentage of income, homes are 2 to 5 times more than they were like just 75 years ago in the post-war, like in the immediate post-war era. That's a significant advantage that the boomers had, or the silent generation had, for sure. But if you were to ask everyone in the world, would you rather live now in the place that you're in than 100 years ago in the place that you're in? I'm going to assume the vast majority of people are going to say now. And this isn't to suggest that we don't have unique problems that have presented themselves in the modern era. I'm certainly not saying that. There's all kinds of problems that need to be addressed still. People will always say that forever. I think that's because things are getting better, though. You know, if you would ask the question, you know, 100 years into the dark ages, maybe people would have said, I want to go back. But in the modern era, people say that they would rather live now than in, you know, 1925 because the world has just gotten better, more prosperous. But it's that black pill. Like the black pill is underneath all of it. Everything is f***ed. It's getting so much worse. We live in a dystopian nightmare. And in 20 years, if we continue on this pace, we'll either be extinct or... I think like climate black pillism, I think like that can be somewhat justified, which is a big deal. Climate is something that we need to pay attention to, more than pay attention to. We need to address in a very substantial way. Maybe I'll be black pill in 5 years, you know? I don't know. We'll see.